Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing EB-5 source of funds, best practices for African investors. This webinar will be recorded. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides, please email us at info@eb to provide you with a copy of the slide deck. This is a quick overview of where we're going on today's webinar. We'll talk a little bit about EB-5AN, we'll introduce our guest panelists, we'll get into details about source of funds considerations for investors from Africa, we'll go through a real case study, and then we'll talk about some statistics and unique source of funds considerations for investors from specific African countries, and then we'll wrap up with just a few minutes about some of our current urban and rural TEA projects available today. So quickly about EB-5AN, we're a national EB-5 regional center operator and investment fund manager. We've worked with thousands of investors over the last 10 plus years from many, many countries. This is a map where our clients have come from over the years, and another map showing where many of our regional centers are in the US. We currently cover all of the continental United States. I'm Sam Silverman here on the left-hand side. A little bit more about my bio and background is there below my photo, and then my partner Mike Schoenfeld here on the right side as well. And now I'll take a minute and introduce our guest panelist, Simone Williams, Managing Partner of Williams Global Law. Simone is a very experienced EB-5 immigration attorney, and I'll let her introduce herself and share a little bit about her experience in EB-5 and in immigration generally before we get into the details of today's webinar.
All right, thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. My name is Simone Williams, as Sam mentioned, and I've been practicing immigration law for almost 20 years, I would say about 20 years, and have extensive experience with investment-related immigration, including EB-5. I started my career at a law firm called Baker McKenzie, one of the largest law firms in the world, and we did do EB-5 all the way back then. Roughly 15 years ago, I was also general counsel to an EB-5 regional center where we raised over $60 million from EB-5 investors. And now I have my own practice where we focus a lot on EB-5 as well as other immigrant investment visas, but EB-5 is one of our specialties. We have a lot of experience with that. And so we're very excited to be here today to discuss the many potential issues with source of funds and how to work with an amazing EB-5 project that Sam will discuss later as well. So happy to be here and thank you.
So generally, before we get into source of funds specifics, let's talk a little bit about just EB-5 investment popularity that you've seen by country in Africa. How does EB-5 interest in Africa kind of shake out, and how has that kind of been present in your career with clients from that region that you've worked with?
Well, we definitely have seen investors and interest from South Africa. According to the latest statistics, EB-5 popularity from African countries, you can see South Africa, Nigeria, followed by Egypt and Ethiopia. I've represented investors from South Africa and Nigeria, as well as Ethiopia, not Egypt as yet, but I've seen interest from West Africa as well. West African countries rather, including Nigeria, including Ghana, including the French-speaking African countries. So we're starting to see more and more interest in those countries, of course. And I think that I've been working with investors in Nigeria, and they're very excited about the new changes in the rules that are allowing for a little bit of a faster processing time for the EB-5. With rural projects and things like that. So I think we're seeing more popularity from countries like Nigeria right now.
Got it. And of the investors from Africa that you've represented, over the last 20 years, what would you say are some of the most kind of common themes or parallels that you've seen in terms of investors, from that region and their desire to do EB-5, but then also, with respect to source of funds, like what are some of the common things that kind of set investors apart from this region versus,
region? Yes. So the main issue with investors from the continent, and particularly in certain countries, Ethiopia, I want to say Nigeria, is well, Ethiopia. Let's speak about Ethiopia and other countries where they have restrictions in acquiring U.S. dollars and transferring U.S. dollars, and I think that's with Nigeria as well. So there's an inability to get USD and transfer to the project. They have the money, but it's very difficult to get the money out or to buy, to get that currency due to limits with their government. And so that's proved to be a lot of a main issue, and trying to work through that. How do they show where their money is coming from? Some investors, they may have purchased money on something they call the parallel market, particularly in Nigeria, and it may be hard to document, that they purchased this money. But we have ways to kind of prove and show that their money is coming from a legitimate source, even when they're purchasing it from the parallel market. But just why they need to work with an immigration attorney very quickly to make sure everything is documented correctly. In terms of countries where they just can't, source the USD, a lot of the times they have either businesses or interest in other countries like Dubai. Dubai seems to be a center for a lot of African businesses. And so if they have businesses in a country like Dubai, then it's easier to transfer their funds and their money from a Dubai bank account to the US.
Got it. Okay. These more unique aspects by country a little bit later, but for now, let's just zoom out a little bit and talk generally about what is source of funds, why is it important, and how does it fit in to an EB-5 investment for an investor who's bringing funds, primarily from Africa, let's say.
Okay, sure. So just big picture, with the new rules, it's called the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act. That's I will just refer to it as the new EB-5 rules that were enacted in 2022. So right now, if you file your application, the government would look at your source of funds and the project at all one time. If the project was already approved, it may take a little bit less time, but now under the new rules, the project has to first be approved, and then you're able to get your approval of your EB-5 I-526 source of funds. So the source of funds is very, very important. When you file your application, that's what the USCIS is going to be really looking at. And that source of funds means, how does that fit with EB-5 is they want to know, the government wants to know how the funds were lawfully obtained. And there are so many different ways to prove that, but under the new rules, again, things are becoming more stringent, and we need to have a very thorough documentation to prove the source of funds. First, the investment amount has to meet the EB-5 requirements in terms of showing where the money comes from and the types of documentation that's required to support the source of funds. Of course, the source of the funds have to be lawfully obtained and has to be traced. Not only is coming from a lawful source, but the government needs to show how it ended up in the US. I think a lot of times, African clients, they make their money in Africa, and that's completely fine. But how did the money arrive in the US? We have to document it. And how it was invested into the new commercial enterprise, which is what the EB-5 project is. On the EB-5 project side, they're the ones that will provide the information showing how the jobs will be created and that the investor is actively involved in the NCE. But from our perspective, I represent the client, the investor, and I and our team work with the investor to kind of determine how best, to prove where their money is coming from, and how best can we show that. They have the amount of money, which now is $800,000 as the investment. in a TA, the targeted employment area. And so we have to prove, there's many ways sometimes to prove that we're gonna go into in further detail in the next slides, but we really have to make sure that at the base level that we're showing that the investor is the legal owner of the capital and they obtained the capital through lawful means, and the money, we're able to show how the money was transferred into the US project, the EB-5 project.
Perfect. So we'll start with kind of an overview of the most common sources. These are the 4 most common ones, but maybe before we dive into these 4, could you talk a little bit about, what, legally sourced means? Like how does the government kind of define or look at, legally sourced? What are the things that they're looking for when determining are funds legally sourced or not legally sourced?
Well, they can't come from illegal ways, Legally sourced means that it was accumulated from one of these lawful sources, like your income, real estate. Everything is, there's no illegality concerning how you made your money. It has to be easily traced and sourced. Legally sourced means we need to provide documentation as to how the money was earned. Whether you received a gift, whether it was proceeds from a real estate property, whether it's your income, we have to provide the documentation showing how you earned your funds. So legally sourced, it has to be it could be from a variety of ways, but we have to be able to document that. There has to be a paper trail to prove that you received the money lawfully and that you pay taxes if applicable, and all of that has to be evidence. We have to provide evidence of how the money was earned.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So I'll quickly walk through these 4, and then we'll dive into detail. So ordinary income. So that's typically income that's going to be earned, from typical employment, working as a lawyer or a doctor, as an engineer, just salary income. Capital gains, that's going to be a gain on a capital asset. So you buy a stock for $10, it goes up, you sell it, or you buy a piece of property for a certain amount of money and you sell it and there's a gain. That's all permitted as long as taxes are paid. Gifts or inheritance, so money that's gifted, if there's applicable tax in that jurisdiction that needs to be paid, those taxes are paid. Or funds that are inherited, someone in the family passes away, you inherit money, you've got to document how the inheritance flowed to you, taxes, if applicable, were paid, and then how did the relative, obtain those assets before you got them by way of inheritance. And then loans. So if you take a loan personally or to your business, what was the collateral for those loans? How were they paid? What are the terms? Are they market, not market? All of that is going to need to be disclosed and be included. So to start, Simone, do you want to kind of walk us through ordinary income, which is probably the most common of these that you see?
Sure. So ordinary income, of course, is the income that you've earned from your employment, or any income you receive, maybe from real estate proceeds or being, I guess. Do you have another slide with real estate sale?
We do.
Okay, so I'll just stick to the employment income then. Okay, that's perfect. So as I was saying, employment income is the funds that that you've received from your work, your job, and as the slide it mentions here, that the types of documentation that we would need are, of course, your pay stubs, your employment contract, even an employment verification letter, which we're happy to provide you with a template, and of course your bank statement showing accumulation and maintenance of funds. Even in addition, your income tax, if you do, or if you're in a country that requires income tax. I know some countries like Ethiopia don't have income tax for individuals, and they're not required, although they do have to provide some type of, they have a letter or financial statement from a company sometimes. But They really prefer, they do like to see the bank statements showing the accumulation of the income coming into your account, and being able to show that the income that's being lawfully earned. And pay stubs, of course, go to that. So that's pretty easy if it's a third-party employer. Self-employed, again, your personal bank statements will show income, accumulation of income. We also would like the business bank statements as well, just showing the accumulation and maintenance of the funds going in and out. I think 5 years is probably, it may be difficult sometimes to get, but 5 years would be about 5 years worth of bank statements I would prefer to show. And if you're self-employed, then you can show contracts, purchase orders, and basically the background of the company and what the company does as well, because you want to make sure to, I mean, you'll definitely need the registration documents of the company to show the company actually exists. If it's a self-employed, if it's your company, you will need organizational documents showing the company exists and for how long, and that you're a manager of the company, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's essentially it. But I think that the ordinary income is one of the cleanest routes, as long as you're able to provide the documentation that's listed here. Because without these key documents, you're going to get something called a request for evidence from the USCIS. Once we file it, then they may ask for more information or documents clarifying what's required. And so if you don't provide them with everything that they're asking for, they may ask for that in the future.
Got it. Okay. I think we'll skip over that. We talked about that. Let's talk about capital gains.
Okay. So as long as, if capital gains on real property, as long as you're able to document the income that was used to purchase the property in the first place, they definitely like to go behind the actual, sometimes want to know information about the initial asset. And so if you're using capital gains from real property, they also want to know that you had the money to purchase the property in the first place. So you have to prove title ownership of the property. You also have to show bank statements and income showing that you had the sufficient amount of money. And we have to explain we have to discuss your profile as an investor, as an individual, where you work, how you made the money, et cetera, how you got the money in the first place, and how it was sold, and then used to fund the EB-5 investment. For selling a company, we obviously have to document all of the financial statements of the company for the last 7 years, the tax returns of the company, that is a lawful company, of course, registration documents, organizational documents, obviously the sales agreement, and the bank statement showing receipt of the sales proceeds. So all of that information is required to prove, one, that you own the company, and then your initial, and they even definitely require now that you have to actually show the initial investment in the company, that you had the money to purchase, or you were involved in the company in the first place. Like, they're going back. So sometimes, how do we verify something so long ago? How do we provide that? We would, in some cases, prepare an affidavit attesting to all of these facts. And we'd have to work with you specifically to see what you can provide to be able to prove whether you're getting funds from the sale of a company or real property. Now, what happens with it being outside of the document retention period? And most places have like a 7-year retention period, so that could be a problem. We would have to, in our cases, if it's outside of the retention period, we definitely have to prepare an affidavit that's notarized, just explaining that you don't have access to it. But we'll have to provide corroborating evidence, just proving the funds being that you purchased the company, or you were involved with the investment of the company, and then the company's earnings, and then the sale of the company, if it's a sale company. I mean, essentially, we should be able to prove at least 5 to 7 years. After 7 years, if there's some issues, we'd have to put together some type of notarized statement from you explaining the situation, why you can't get access to the documents.
Got it. Okay. A couple other things I want to mention there are translation of documents. So everything is going to have to be converted to English that isn't already in English. We talked a little bit earlier about taxes. So we've got to prove that taxes have been paid. Obviously, this is going to vary by jurisdiction, by transaction type. So that's going to be different by country. And then tracing, which we talked about a little bit earlier as well. We've got to show how the money moved from its original source in the account and has made its way into the current EB-5 investment new commercial enterprise account. So tracing all the way through.
Yeah, and that again, for African investors, that tends to be a challenge because sometimes they're purchasing the USD currency, they're purchasing it from the black market or from a friend, and it just becomes a little bit convoluted. So I think the best thing for us to do as your representative attorney is to really walk you through the best way that we could prove your source of funds. Because sometimes, I mean, if it's hard to trace and the government, may not accept it. So while we can try to explain how it came into your account and then somehow went into your friend's account and then somehow went back into your USD account in the US, and it's a little bit, it's hard to trace. It's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue with USCIS, but we definitely could work with you to figure out the best way to prove your source of funds, even in those circumstances.
And that's another good point generally, is that there's more than one way to do a source of funds. And so the goal is to choose the way that's kind of the most simple, logical, and most easily documented. So that's also important as well.
Exactly. Because I think investors come into the door with, this is how they did it. This is, maybe income or sale from proceeds. But then we figure out, well, there's other ways. They may have a friend in the US that's willing to give them a gift, willing to show their evidence of their source of funds. That might make it a little bit easier for them. And then they can pay back their relative or friend. But their relative or friend would be kind of the source of funds in that case, if they're willing to provide them with a loan or a gift. I guess we'll talk about that. But again, there are different ways to, there are different ways, the numerous ways that we're discussing. So we just kind of work with you and figure out your particular situation, because everyone's situation is a little different and unique. Given the fact with African investors and the issues with foreign currency and transfer restrictions and all of that, we really have to make sure that we come up with a good plan to prove their source of funds from the African country to the EB-5 project bank account. It all has to be clearly shown.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Let's spend a couple minutes on gifts and inheritance issues that you also come across.
Okay, so in the scenario where you receive a gift or inheritance through either a will or property that you were acquired, we'd have to definitely provide evidence of how that you were that you're a rightful heir of the asset or the property that you acquired through a will. We would need a copy of the will. Of course, we need sworn affidavits proving the source of funds of the donor who passed away. And in the case where they died intestate, and how do you provide that? We use sworn affidavits from third parties with knowledge of the donor and the relative, and explaining their source of funds. That's the best that we could do under these circumstances. Another issue is, can you utilize your inheritance as collateral? You can, but again, we would still have to go through and walk the government through how you came into how you acquired the inheritance. So even though you could borrow, you still need to provide the source of funds or the explanation of how the inheritance came into, how you became the heir, the rightful heir of the inheritance. So we have to still go through all of this, the source of funds and the evidence of the inheritance.
And what is an affidavit, and how does that kind of fit into helping document?
An affidavit is a document that is just a declaration or a statement that's sworn by like a notary, and just explaining in detail the dates and explaining just the background of, for instance, in this case, the inherited property and the donor and your relationship to the donor. It's a sworn declaration that you would be under, that you're swearing and you'd be committing perjury or doing something illegal if you were to lie, for instance, on the affidavit. You and anybody associated with this transaction, we would prepare something like that, just swearing to tell the truth and explaining how the property was acquired, who the donor is, how the donor earned that particular asset, and that's the best we can do under these circumstances. If, for instance, we don't have other evidence of the inheritance. But the most important thing is, if you are the rightful heir of the asset or the property, you would have to provide. You should have a copy of the will. If you don't, we would have to provide a sworn affidavit, and then we would also have to provide the rules of, how in your particular circumstance in your country, how you became the rightful heir, whether it's intestate or by will, and just explain that. We'd have to provide all of that information and documentation, kind of providing the USCIS. The USCIS is the U.S. Immigration Agency, the background of that this is a legitimate source. The donor acquired the property or provided you with the assets legitimately, lawfully, as we're getting back to that lawful. They want to make sure this is not like unlawfully gained or through some type of criminal activity. So we have to make sure to tell the USCIS, provide them with all those facts as detailed as possible, so that they accept in situations where you may not have all of the documentation.
Got it. Okay. And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about loans and what you see kind of most common with loans that are used to fund a portion of the EB-5 investment.
So there are different types of loans. There's, you could get a loan from your family, your friends, or employer. It's different than a commercial bank loan. So the first thing is when we help you draft a personal loan agreement, and it does have to be, you have to use an asset as collateral. I mean, you could also get an uncollateralized loan from a financial institution. That would be the best thing. Obviously, that you don't have to prove the source of collateral, but if you do get a personal loan from a friend or a family member, or even an employer, you do have to provide an asset as collateral. So we would have to explain, we would have to prove that you own the collateral, and in some cases even explain how you received the money to obtain the collateral. So even your source of funds, some officers are looking into that as well. The source of funds of how you obtain the collateral, as well as proving your ownership of the collateral. Another thing that I'm seeing now, and then a valuation report of what is the collateral worth. In this case, you're doing an EB-5 of $800,000, and the admin fee is roughly $80,000. So $880,000 would need to be, the collateral needs to be at least in that amount or more. And in other cases with the loan, what we're seeing as well is that in a personal loan agreement, the lender, in this case a family, friend, or employer, needs to also provide a statement that they know that the loan is going towards an EB-5 investment, that they have knowledge of that, and that it's an at-risk investment going towards a foreign investment in the US. That also needs to be provided in the loan agreement. USCIS is looking for a statement such as that. You could obviously you know, to not even have to worry about all of that, you could also get a gift from a family or friend, and say that there's no repayment and this is simply a gift, and we would provide you with a declaration that's signed and notarized between you and the gifter, if it's a friend or family, if you don't want to go through all of, but they have to be prepared that and say that it's a gift, as well as they know that it's going towards the EB-5 investment and that it's subject to risk or loss.
Got it. Okay. All right, let's shift gears now and just kind of walk us through a real life case study that involves a loan that's secured by some real estate.
Okay, so the case study, so we start here. So we walk in the door interested in EB-5. So what do we need from you? Well, initially, of course, we need to know who you are, your passport, your birth certificate, your driver's license. In this case, the South African investor is interested in getting a loan and securing it by real estate assets. We have to get all of the information concerning the property, you know, that you own the property. How much is the property worth? How did you get the property? The source of funds to use, how did you get the collateral to secure the loan in the first place? We need to show that. So in this case, the EB-5 investor owns a multifamily apartment building in Johannesburg and is using that as the collateral. In this case, we need to prove that there's a mortgage on the property, and what would happen if the property were to foreclose. And we provide that as we provide all the evidence proving it is a market transaction. I think I'm looking at so that's the fourth thing. And the fifth thing we show, so it's going, the EB-5 investor has is the friend giving the loan here?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Excellent. So the friend is giving a loan to the EB-5 investor, and the friend in the United States has a digital consulting business. So we also have to show that the friend who's giving the loan, there's two stages here. There's one, the South African investor who has collateral to be able to get this $880,000 loan from his friend. And then there's the EB-5 investor. So we had the source of funds and just proving the collateral and how that they owned the collateral and they had the money to purchase the collateral. And then we shift to the EB-5, the friend of the EB-5 investor in the US, and they have a digital consulting business that's making $300,000 per year after taxes for 5 years. So that's roughly 300 times 5 is 15. Am I 50? 100, 15 million, right? I just want to make sure.
One and a half million.
Yeah,
and then of that 1.5, they're going to make this loan of 800, basically.
Right. So the income that the company has earned is 1.5, and they're loaning 800,000 to, let's just say 800,000 without the admin, to the EB-5 investor, and this is how they're proving it. So we're proving it as a legal business because we're providing the organizational documents, the tax ID number, the EIN, they call that the tax, with it showing it. And we also, I would recommend, of course, providing the income tax returns showing how the money was earned, and also the bank statement showing the money was received into the business bank account and actually utilized. Because unfortunately, USCIS is getting very strict with their source of funds requirements and documentation. Just providing the income tax return showing that the business earned the money is not sufficient. We need to show the bank statements for the company as well, and showing that the money was actually received by the company for that period of time. So for the last 5 years. And of course, we have to prove, I kind of skipped a part, we have to prove who that lender is. So providing his passport, his driver's license, etc. And then of course, the loan agreement is the most important thing. And as I mentioned with the loan agreements, we have to have a statement in there where the EB-5, the friend of the EB-5 acknowledges that the loan is for the purposes of the EB-5 investment that is subject to risk or loss.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about just what the final product looks like. So how do we communicate all of this to USCIS as part of an investor's application?
Okay, so we have a template cover letter. You see that on your screen. So there's a lot of exhibits and a lot of information. We basically prepare a source of funds memo explaining how you earn the funds, whether it's from a loan or from a friend or a gift or inheritance. And we prepare a memo outlining and explaining in detail how you came about the funds, the investment funds. And then of course we have supporting exhibits for every single thing that we're saying, how you came about the funds. We need the supporting documentation is very key here. I can't underscore that enough. We need to have the specific documentation. And, you know, like I said, 5 to 7 years, bank statements, last 5 years of income tax returns. You know, it could be a lot. There's a lot of documentation sometimes that we have to be able to trace and explain it because the government really needs that. And then finally, you know, we get all of our documentation. We provide the evidence. We need to show how the money came from the African account, wherever you are, to the U.S. account in the EB-5 bank account. That's like that, all of that trace, just not only the source of funds, but also the transfer of funds from the account in your country to the EB-5 bank account.
Got it. Okay, that's a very good summary. Another comment generally on this is that these packages tend to be thousands of pages. There's lots of documents. Many times statements can be for many years, and so it is a paper filing. Yes. So these documents need to be printed and shipped to USCIS. So, you know, you don't just email this and then that's it. It's a really big effort to get everything organized, double checked, printed, make sure no pages are missing, and then get it submitted.
Yeah, I think you know, that's the thing. This is a lot of work for us. Together, we're working with you, but it is a paper filing, unfortunately. This is not emailed or digital. This is all paper and printing of a lot of documents. And so just, yeah, that's the great point to understand that. We need to get the documents from you as well. Sometimes people prefer mailing. We prefer sending it across digitally, the file digitally, even though, or we'll send you a link where you could upload your documentation, and then we will print it, because it does, there, as you can see with the exhibit list, there's just a lot of documents involved, not to mention your source of funds, as well as the EB-5 project documentation. Could, as you said, Sam mentioned, at least over 1,000 pages sometimes. So, but we work together and get it all sorted for you.
So one of the last things I want to spend a few minutes on before we talk about some of the available projects is some of these unique situations by country. We talked a little bit about the parallel markets and things, but yeah, what would you say some things that investors should be aware of, and why it's so important to work with someone who's helped other countries, who's helped investors from some of these specific countries get approvals historically?
Okay, so we'll go down the list here. South Africa has a transfer restriction of approximately USD 532,000. So once you've maxed out that amount, you know, you cannot, you're not able to transfer more than that amount to an outside source. So what do investors do? So they could work in another jurisdiction, possibly if they have a business interest in another country, and or work with somebody, like have a friend in the US where you know, having a loan arrangement with the friend and paying them in South Africa, and they provide the outstanding amount. So I think we would have to just figure out how we can use another method outside of you transferring the money from South Africa to the EB-5 if you've maxed out your allowance for the year, or close to that, or even in the sense of if you're able to transfer up to 500,000 but need $300,000 more, we have to figure out another method to utilize so you're able to transfer the outstanding amount to the EB-5 project. With Nigeria, there is an issue. There's a scarcity of foreign exchange. It's been acknowledged by the UK government, the US government, the Nigerian government. So it's very hard for Nigerian citizens to purchase USD in the official market. And that is a challenge. And so the USCIS, to my knowledge, understands this is an issue. So we would have to really be clear in documenting if you did have to purchase USD from the parallel market, showing the showing that the transactions by your bank statements, showing the money coming out of your account, and then even on the same day being transferred by the third party, documentation letters. We need all, like, as clear as possible and as clean as possible, proving that, you know, you had to purchase USD from the parallel market. As well, we're going to need a sworn statement affidavit from you explaining the transaction. So that's very important. It's not the best, I know this is something that you have to do as a Nigerian because you're not able to purchase to get USD, and you have to get it from these third parties. But I would urge you, before purchasing, even before you do this, because you know you'd have to do that if you're interested in EB-5, to work with us first, so make sure that we have the proper documentation in place and that everything is done contemporaneously in terms of purchasing the funds and the funds going directly into the EB-5 project bank account and or your bank account. We'll need to have all of that transaction very clearly indicated, and it can become very convoluted. So make sure to work, even before you purchase any USD, please work with an attorney, preferably me, but an attorney before you start purchasing money in support of the EB-5 investment. With the French-speaking African countries that I've worked with, they also need permission to transfer large amounts of foreign currency. And it requires the foreign exchange must be documented and approved by the exchange control authorization. And so it's just a matter, lots of businesses in certain regions have relationships with the government. And as long as they could document and explain the purposes for business reasons, they could overcome some of the transfer restrictions. That's something that, depending on the jurisdiction, of course, that we'd have to further consult with you. Finally, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not able to transfer birr out of Ethiopia and or acquire USD. So that's a major problem. A lot of investors, though, have business interests in other countries like Dubai. It's a hub for many Ethiopian businesses. So they have, thankfully, business accounts and bank accounts in Dubai, and their companies are registered in Dubai. So that's how they do is overcome the birr issue. A lot of them get agreements with friends who provide them with a loan, and then they pay the friend the funds in Ethiopia, and the friend loans them the money and transfers it to the EB-5 project in the US. Again, we spoke about the loan arrangements and how that works, but that's how they get around the inability to transfer the birr, the Ethiopian currency, out of Ethiopia.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Simone. Before we get some concluding thoughts, I'll just spend a few minutes talking about some of our current EB-5 projects that are now available at the $800,000 amount. And one important thing to note here is that the USCIS filing fee is currently $3,700 approximately as of February 5th today. But it has been announced and confirmed that filing fee is jumping up to more than $11,000 on April 1st of 2024. So that is investors considering making an investment soon. With that said, as we kind of alluded to earlier, under the new EB-5 rules currently in effect, EB-5 projects in rural areas are significantly more advantageous for investors because they give faster processing. So the I-526C green card application is going to be approved on a priority basis. And once approved, there's 20% of available visas set aside in a reserved category, which basically means particularly important for investors from high volume countries like India and China, where there have been historical backlogs or visa retrogression. And so having more visas available and getting approved faster means you can collect one of those scarce visas sooner, means that for investors applying today, it's going to be a lot faster, particularly for investors from India or China, to select a rural project to actually obtain the green card in their hand. And so what we've kind of done as a company is focus on how do we identify low risk, safe, rural EB-5 projects where EB-5 capital is coming into an already capitalized project and is reducing other more expensive capital sources with jobs already underway and proof that the business model is actually economically viable even without any EB-5 funds invested. And so on the screen here, we can see that we currently have 3 different rural EB-5 projects: our Twin Lakes project, Kindred Keystone, and Wahale, Utah. These are all real estate development projects located in rural areas. Our Twin Lakes project is probably our most popular one. It's being developed by the Coulter. The project sold more than 600 homes already at a 1,300 total. The prior fund has a 956F approval and many I-526Cs approved already as well. Coulter has been developing real estate for over 25 years. They've never not repaid a single loan, and they've repaid billions of dollars, and they've never not finished a project ever. And they've done almost 20 prior EB-5 projects, so very extensive track record. We also have our Kindred Resort at Keystone project, which is being managed by Vail Resorts, a public company. It's condo and hotel right next to the Keystone Mountain, immediately adjacent to the gondola, and all the required jobs created as well. And then lastly, our Wahale, Utah project, another single family home and lot community just outside of Park City with a secured EB-5 loan, many jobs already created, and the 956F already approved. And then for those investors typically who are not from India or China, or who are in the United States already on H-1B, F-1, or E-2, who can wait a little bit longer for the green card, but would prefer to get their capital back sooner and also target a higher return on their capital, our Boynton Beach equity and loan project is a good option. It has a much shorter target investment duration than the rural projects. And in the equity offering, investors are getting a substantially higher return as well. So that's an important option to consider for investors who are willing to wait a little bit longer for the green card, but are going to optimize for getting their capital back a little bit sooner and a higher return in the equity option as well. All right, that kind of concludes all of the formal slides that we have for today's webinar. I think before we, Simone, could you share a little bit more information about how clients can get in touch with you and what your process looks like in terms of supporting individual investors who are exploring EB-5, and how they would work with you and your team to get an application submitted if they wanted to try and do it before April or sometime later this year?
Sure, of course. So the first thing we would do is set up a consultation. We can do a complimentary consultation. There's also a paid one if you need a little bit more time. But I would recommend consulting with me or an attorney first before you start this process. just to understand what it is that you need to do. It's always very important in this process. There's so much going on. The investment amount is pretty high. There's a lot of documentation that you need to support the petition. It's called an EB-5 petition. So it's very important that you understand the process before you start and get that consultation with an attorney, so you just have an idea of what you need to do, what's the best way to show your source of funds. With all of the different issues with the African investors, even more so, how do we prove the source of funds? What's the best way to prove it? Maybe one way you're thinking, it could be another way. So we need to talk through that. And in terms of getting in touch with us, our phone number is there on the screen, 202-753-5075. That's our direct office number. You can call that to schedule a time with me, or you can email me directly, and our legal assistants will schedule a time. We thank you very much, Sam, for the opportunity to discuss the source of funds for specifically African investors, because I know there are a little bit of trickiness going on with some of the different countries in Africa. So I really appreciate this time and working with you, and you know, I don't represent SAM or EB-5 AN, but I know they have some really amazing EB-5 projects. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Simone. And we've worked with Simone on a number of different cases over the years, and we're very, very pleased with her work, and highly recommend her if you're interested in exploring a potential EB-5 investment as well. So please reach out, and we'll be happy to get you more information.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Always
Thank you, everybody.
answer questions. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.